Welcome to the Deep Dive. Our mission here is to take a stack of dense sources, articles, and research, break it all down, and extract the most vital nuggets of knowledge and insight so you can get truly well-informed fast.
And today, we are diving into something I find fascinating, the hidden truth.
Exactly. We're looking at cases where justice didn't come from a clear fingerprint or a perfect DNA match or, the classic smoking gun.
We are exploring a really interesting paradox of modern crime solving. It's this idea that when the obvious physical evidence is completely absent, the most minuscule, overlooked, and seemingly irrelevant details become the most powerful witnesses.
The most objective witnesses.
Exactly. These are the cases that prove the entire investigative process has to go deeper, way deeper than the surface.
Absolutely. We've actually given the methodology used in these specific investigations a name for our deep dive today: the decompose and distill approach.
I like that.
Right. You start with a cold or confusing case, a stack of trash, a pool of water, a bunch of magnetic noise on a computer disk. You decompose the scene.
You break it down.
You break it down into its smallest possible scientific components: the chemical makeup of a bottle, the life cycle of an insect, the raw data on a diskette, until you can distill that one single, undeniable scientific fact that links the suspect to the victim.
And that distilled fact is often something the killer never even considered was evidence in the first place.
Not in a million years.
No. Detectives, they rarely walk into a clean, simple scene. Instead, they have to use highly specialized science, forensic entomology, batch chemistry, digital archaeology to examine sources the average person just ignores. They are literally looking for witnesses in the most unlikely places.
And today's deep dive gives us 3 incredibly compelling examples of this process in action. We're going to see how chemistry proved a shared moment in time,
How a tiny aquatic insect proved a 9-month cover-up was a complete lie.
and how a digital ghost file revealed a killer's years-long premeditation. Our goal is to really dissect the specific scientific principles, the how and the why, that let investigators make these impossible connections and, turn zero evidence murder cases into life sentences.
It's a study in meticulous, rigorous science, and I think we should start with the smallest of details.
Yeah.
A code stamped on a bottle.
Okay, let's unpack this and dive right into the code in the bottle. So our first story takes us back to Columbia, South Carolina. It's November 13th, 1996.
And the setting is grim. Near a YMCA football field, police find the body of a 30-year-old woman, Virginia Russell.
She'd been shot multiple times in the head. The estimated time of death was just hours earlier, sometime in the very early morning.
The initial crime scene gave them a frustrating mix of information. They found shell casings, which at least confirmed the shooting happened right there.
Right, it wasn't a dump site.
It wasn't a secondary location. They also found a torn shoulder pad and an empty wallet, which, immediately suggests robbery was a likely motive.
But the most significant item, though it seemed kind of useless at first, was the presence of 2 empty bottles of Michelob Light beer.
And this is where the investigation just slams into a wall, which is so common in these types of crimes.
A total dead end.
A total dead end. The immediate forensic search for a suspect link yielded absolutely nothing. The fingerprints on those 2 beer bottles were too smudged to be usable.
Useless.
The shoulder pad was generic. There was no foreign hair, no fibers, no trace evidence on Russell's body to connect her to the killer. It was a classic forensic brick wall.
So the initial decomposition phase of the case, it was really about establishing context, right?
Exactly. They identified Russell, and they found out she was working as a call girl for an escort service.
And that empty wallet reinforces the theory of a robbery homicide.
Right, which unfortunately often means the killer is a stranger, so intransient. That makes the case exponentially harder to solve.
But then the very next day, they find the first tangible lead that allows them to start connecting the dots.
They locate Russell's car. It's in a parking lot in the nearby Olympia area.
And inside, they find blood on the console. It was later matched to her blood group, which suggests she was shot at least once while she was still in the car.
And then, tucked into the back seat, almost like it was forgotten, was a single, unopened bottle of Michelob Light.
The same brand, the same type they found near her body.
Now, this is when Sergeant Andrew Caldwell, the investigator on the case, makes this crucial connecting insight that just shifts the entire investigation.
He starts thinking bigger picture.
Yes. He realized Russell's murder fit a pattern. He was already working a sexual assault case from just 3 days prior.
And the victims were similar.
Both were call girls. And, significantly, Russell's car was parked in clear view of the apartment where the earlier sexual assault took place.
Wow.
So Caldwell made a massive but ultimately correct leap of faith. Solve the assault, and you might just solve the murder.
Okay, so this is where the narrative tension really starts to build.
It does. The previous assault victim was able to identify her attacker, a man named Roy Beck Jr., who was using the alias Daniel Davis.
Did he have a record?
Beck had a minor but persistent history with the department, mostly related to break-ins. Nothing this violent. The photo lineup was immediate, and the victim confirmed his identity without hesitation.
So they have a name, they have a face.
And Beck knows it. He fled his apartment, left it abandoned and trashed. Police searched it and found 3 more empty Michelob Light bottles on the floor,
3 more.
along with some ammunition that, interestingly, didn't match the murder weapon.
Okay.
They tracked him down and arrested him. But the real breakthrough came when they searched the apartment where he was hiding, which was the home of his friend, Richard Buya.
And in Buya's apartment, they found what looked like the smoking gun.
Everything. They recovered the Rambo-style hunting knife that the assault victim described. They found an escort service phone book. And they found the actual murder weapon, which was ballistically matched to the shell casings found near Russell's body.
They also found a pair of bloody boots, and the blood type matched Virginia Russell's. They had the physical evidence.
But here comes the critical obstacle, the thing that almost collapsed the entire prosecution, Beck's defense.
He talks.
He talks, and he's smart. Buck immediately realized the peril he was in and shifted the blame entirely to his friend, Buya.
How could he do that?
He argued, and pretty reasonably, that the gun was registered to Buya. The bloody boots belonged to Buya as well. All the physical incriminating evidence, the weapon and the clothes, was found in Buya's apartment, not Beck's.
That's a nightmare scenario for a prosecutor.
Oh, it's terrible.
If the gun is registered to the friend and all the bloody evidence is at the friend's place, you have nothing but circumstantial suspicion pointing at Beck.
Exactly. You have to establish a definitive, non-circumstantial link placing Beck and Russell together at the time of death, or a jury will never convict. The case was literally crumbling because they couldn't definitively separate the 2 men's involvement.
So this is the moment. This is where they had to pivot entirely and apply that decompose and distill method.
And they applied it to the single most unlikely source available.
Yeah.
Those 6 Michelob Light beer bottles.
Let's count them up. 2 empties by the body.
3 empties in Beck's vacated apartment.
And the single unopened bottle in Russell's car.
The mission became prove beyond a doubt that all 6 of those bottles originated from the exact same commercially packaged 6-pack.
Which, when you consider that Anheuser-Busch distributes nearly 200 million bottles of that brand every year, sounds like the definition of an impossible connection.
It's a needle in a global haystack. It required specialized industrial knowledge, which led investigators to Mark Landers. He was the head of quality assurance at the Anheuser-Busch plant in Williamsburg, Virginia.
And Landers becomes the key.
He becomes the key to unlocking the distilled scientific fact. He explained their highly specific internal coding system.
Okay, walk us through this code, because this is genuinely where the science becomes the star witness.
Every bottle contains a code, typically something like 17OCT96WF58. We see these codes all the time, we ignore them. They're just background noise on the label.
Right.
But to the manufacturer, they are absolutely essential. Landers broke down the meaning of each element, showing this microscopic precision of industrial logistics.
So 17 OCT 96 is the date, obviously, October 17th.
Right. W is for the specific plant, Williamsburg.
Yeah.
F is the bottling line they used that day. And then the final 2 digits, 58. That's the game changer.
What's 58?
That represented the specific 15-minute production step on that day.
15 minutes. Not an hour, not a day, but a 15-minute window.
15 minutes. Precisely. That 15-minute window is the core scientific principle here. Every single bottle produced during that exact quarter-hour interval shares the identical code because they were all filled, sealed, and labeled simultaneously.
And crucially, when they're packaged into 6-packs and cases.
The industrial packaging machinery ensures that these uniquely coded bottles are grouped together.
So that means every bottle in that one specific 6-pack, no matter where it ended up in the world, carried the molecular signature of its creation time.
It's an immutable scientific tag, a birthmark. Landers examined all 6 recovered bottles, the 2 by the body, the 3 at Beck's first apartment, and the 1 in Russell's car, and he confirmed it.
All of them.
Every single bottle shared the exact same code, down to the final 2 digits.
Wow. So the defense could no longer argue that the circumstantial evidence was purely Booya's fault.
It completely evaporates. This tiny, invisible code established an irrefutable argument.
The only way those 6 specific bottles from that precise 15-minute production run could be separated to 3 different locations
Beck's place, Russell's car, and the dumping site.
is if Beck and Russell were together sharing that 6-pack during the commission of the crime.
It confirmed the timeline and the location together on the night of the murder. They drove from Beck's place to the Olympia area, drinking along the way. Beck, likely angry over discovering money in her purse when she stepped out of the room, proceeded to rob and murder her, using the gun that was found at Booya's apartment.
So the batch code didn't just link the beer to the locations, it linked the people to the beer. It destroyed Beck's alibi and placed him irrefutably at the scene.
That small, often ignored manufacturing detail became the objective, unassailable witness that tied the weapon, the victim, and the killer together.
And the outcome.
The outcome was a conviction. Roy Beck Jr. was sentenced to life in prison. It's just a stunning example of how forensic science has to go far beyond the expected, transforming industrial logistics into definitive proof of association.
It really makes you wonder how many times this kind of micro detail has been overlooked in cold cases, simply because investigators didn't know the right question to ask the manufacturer. But let's move on from chemical codes to the natural world. Our next case takes us into the environment itself. Specifically, the cold, moving waters of the Muskegon River in western Michigan.
This is in 1989, 9 months after a woman was reported missing. Some sport divers found a startling discovery. A red car, submerged 15 feet down.
And inside was the fully clothed, decomposed body of a woman.
The initial findings immediately confirmed murder. The autopsy showed the victim was beaten at least 6 times with a hard, blunt object. And this was a critical distinction. She died before the car was pushed into the river.
So this was a deliberate attempt to conceal the crime.
A very deliberate attempt to dispose of the body in a way that defied easy detection.
The car was traced back to a man named David Smith, who lived nearby.
And 9 months earlier, on October 2nd, he had reported his Korean wife, Ha-Yoon, missing.
What was his story?
His story was simple. She drove away after a massive argument during which she threw a plate. Domestic dispute gone wrong, maybe a voluntary disappearance.
But Smith's behavior, I imagine, immediately raised some red flags.
Huge red flags. Just 4 days after reporting his wife missing, he filed for divorce.
4 days.
Over the next several months, he was dating actively, he moved in with a new girlfriend, and he was systematically pawing Ha-Yoon's jewelry.
Which is deeply suspicious, but I guess none of those actions are definitively illegal or provable as murder at the time, especially without a body.
Exactly, it's just bad behavior.
But once the body was recovered and identified, the investigation moved quickly to Smith's apartment, which he was now sharing with his new partner.
After nearly a year, finding evidence was a huge challenge. But investigators, using an alternative light source, meticulously searched. They found blood spatter on a kitchen wall and, critically, behind the freezer, tucked under the baseboard.
They found tiny traces of human blood.
Tiny traces. This was their first solid piece of decomposition. It confirmed the kitchen as the site of the fatal beating.
The blood spatter pattern validated the medical examiners, finding that Ha-Yoon had been struck repeatedly with a heavy object.
Yes, but they faced the same immediate obstacle as the first case: forensic difficulty. Because of the long period of decomposition underwater, they couldn't accurately type the victim's blood.
And this is 1989, right? So DNA analysis sensitivity was rudimentary compared to what we have today.
Right, which made identification very difficult. But the ultimate hurdle was proving the timeline. That was essential for proving premeditation or a cover-up.
And Smith had constructed his alibi with a lot of calculation. He was telling friends and implying to police that Ha-Yoon was alive and in contact with others as late as January of the following year.
So if investigators could prove she was in the river before January, they would scientifically dismantle his entire defense.
So how do you date decomposition that happened underwater over an entire winter? I mean, this is the point of ultimate decomposition, where the evidence just seems to vanish.
It seems to. But Detective Miller's keen eye saved the case. When the car was pulled from the Muskegon River in late June, Miller noticed something small but distinct. It was attached firmly to the windshield and the fender.
And it was pupal casings, or cocoons.
Exactly, pupal casings.
Okay, let's transition into the decompose and distill science here. This takes us right into forensic entomology, the study of insects in a legal context.
Miller contacted Richard Merritt, an entomologist, and an expert who had studied the local insect life cycles for over 20 years.
And Merritt immediately identified the species as black flies, which, I love this, are known scientifically by the wonderfully specific German name Kriebelmücken.
The black fly. It proved to be the objective scientific clock they needed. Merritt's 2 decades of research on this specific species in the Michigan climate provided the immutable timeline.
So why are aquatic insects so much more reliable for cold water timeline dating than, say, the blowflies we usually associate with forensic cases?
That is a great question. Terrestrial insects, like blowflies, they rely heavily on warmer temperatures and air access. Their cycles halt almost entirely in the winter.
They go dormant.
They do. Aquatic insects, however, especially those adapted to flowing cold water like the Kriebelmücken, have life cycles specifically timed to the seasonal changes of the water system. Their ability to grow consistently in cold water made them the perfect timestamp for a winter crime.
Okay, so detail the stages for us. How exactly did this one specific insect tell the entire tale?
Well, the cycle starts with the eggs. They hatch in the late fall, specifically November or December, in the Muskegon River. The resulting stage is the larval stage, a small worm-like creature that is entirely aquatic.
In these larvae, they have to attach firmly to a substrate, rocks, leaves, or...
Or, critically, the submerged car. They have to anchor themselves against the current. And here's the key part. They grow continuously throughout the entire winter, feeding on detritus in the flowing water.
So the car had to be present in the water, acting as a substrate during those cold months from November onward for the larva to even attach and grow.
Precisely. This larval stage typically lasts all the way until April or May. It is only then that the larvae enter the pupal stage, building a protective, sealed cocoon around themselves.
And they stay in that cocoon until they emerge as adult flies in late May or early June.
Right, so the fact that Detective Miller found hard, distinctive pupal casings on the car in late June meant that the insect had completed its entire months-long larval stage, the one that requires the coldest part of the year, while attached to the submerged vehicle.
The timeline was scientifically distilled. For those specific pupal casings to be present and fully formed, the car had to have entered the river no later than November.
It wasn't circumstantial evidence. It was an undeniable biological fact based on a predictable, species-specific life cycle. It scientifically refuted David Smith's entire cover-up.
It proved his claim that Ha-Eun was alive and contacting friends in January was a calculated lie.
It was a total lie.
That is profound. The humble cocoon of a black fly utterly dismantles a 9-month alibi.
And that entomological evidence was the trigger investigators needed to pursue the motive and find the missing links.
Knowing Smith was a liar allowed them to press harder.
It did. Colleagues revealed that Smith had tried to hire a hitman a month before Ha-Eun disappeared. The motive, as it turned out, was purely financial.
So then they seized his phone records.
And this led them to a high number of calls in September to 2 numbers in Pittsburgh. One number belonged to a chemical cleaning service where Smith's father worked, and the other belonged to his father's co-worker, Kenny Lamont Latimer.
And when confronted with the phone evidence linking him directly to Smith, Latimer confessed everything.
The whole story came out. Smith had offered him $2,000 to murder Ha-Eun. Smith was already paying alimony to his first wife, and he desperately wanted to avoid more crippling divorce debt.
And Latimer attempted to use bad heroin to kill her, but failed.
He failed, so Smith then murdered her himself, using a wooden statue in the kitchen, and he and Latimer pushed the car into the river together.
So the Kriebelmücke, the black fly, had been observing the crime scene the entire winter.
It was the silent witness. Smith was convicted of murder, receiving 15 to 20 years. It's an amazing demonstration of nature's perfect clock.
It absolutely underscores the rigor required. The difference between a cold case and a conviction was knowing the specific entomology of that specific river at that specific time of year. Our final case involves a slow, insidious poisoning that spanned years and required investigators to look not at chemistry or biology, but deep inside the magnetic storage of a personal computer.
We're in Dana Point, California in 1988. A 46-year-old woman named Janet Overton dies suddenly after years of mysterious illness, weight loss, terrible stomach pain, a metallic taste, and a strange rust-colored rash.
Janet's death was a total enigma. She had been dealing with these vague symptoms for a long, long time. Her initial autopsy was inconclusive. They looked for common poisons, but nothing registered.
So the case went nowhere. It went completely cold for 6 months until Lieutenant Tim Carney received a chilling and absolutely crucial call.
The call came from Richard Overton's first wife, Dorothy Boyer.
And Dorothy suspected Richard had poisoned her years earlier, between 1967 and 1973, with an identical pattern of unexplained symptoms.
This precedent immediately changed how investigators viewed Janet's death.
It reframed everything. Dorothy's story was like a dark blueprint. After her divorce, she suspected foul play and she set a careful trap. She cleaned and marked a new coffee can.
And Richard, who still had access to her home, later broke in and added a reddish powder to it.
Chemical analysis identified that powder as toxic selenium. Richard confessed to poisoning her. Not to kill her, he said, but just to make her chronically sick. Charges were dropped only after he agreed to leave her alone entirely.
So armed with this historical knowledge, investigators went back to the Janet Overton case, hunting for the same substance.
They searched Richard's property, and his daughter found a suspicious syringe, gloves, and a tube of mascara.
And sure enough, the mascara tested positive for selenium, a substance definitely not used by the manufacturer. It looked like an exact repeat of the earlier poisoning.
It did. But here came the major setback. When they tested Janet's preserved archived tissue samples specifically for selenium, the results came back normal.
No abnormal levels of the substance present in her body at the time of death.
None. So the powerful theory based on the first wife's experience had just stalled. They knew he had tried to poison her, but the final fatal dose wasn't selenium.
This required a pivot, a new decomposition of the original findings. The pivotal breakthrough happened completely by chance, over a year after Janet's death.
A toxicologist named Paul Swick was reviewing the preserved vial containing Janet's stomach contents. When he opened the sealed vial, he was completely overwhelmed by the signature odor of bitter almonds.
It's the classic, distinct smell of cyanide.
Cyanide. This immediately raises the question, why was this critical detail missed in the original autopsy conducted a year earlier? It really speaks volumes about the challenges of toxicology.
Well, two factors combined to mask it, right?
That's right. First, it's a matter of human biology. Only about 50% of the population possesses the genetic ability to smell cyanide.
So it's a coin toss if your medical examiner can even detect it by smell.
Exactly. Second, it's a matter of laboratory procedure. The initial standard screening tests conducted in the lab do not always include cyanide unless there is a specific suspicion.
And even if they did, the tests are usually conducted under a powerful fume hood,
which would have rapidly masked the odor, even for those who could smell it. Swick immediately tested the brain, blood, and stomach samples and confirmed the presence of acutely lethal levels of cyanide.
So 1 year later, the cause of death was officially updated to acute cyanide poisoning. They had the poison, but they faced that classic dilemma of poisoning cases.
Identifying the poison is the easy part.
Finding the poisoner requires motive and opportunity, neither of which were initially clear for Richard Overton. He was a successful, outwardly loving father and husband.
Richard was initially impenetrable. There was no clear financial motive. Janet's insurance went directly to her son, not to Richard. He suggested Janet might have committed suicide due to depression or, crucially, that her political enemies were responsible for her death, given her involvement in local politics.
Wait, let's pause on that political deflection for a second. That's a plausible narrative in a high-profile death. How did investigators manage to dismiss that alibi and prove opportunity?
It was dismissed once they found the contradiction in Richard's own testimony regarding his access to the poison.
He denied having it.
He adamantly denied ever having cyanide. But his business partner, Mill Hubbard, contradicted him entirely. Hubbard informed the police that he used cyanide for gold and silver extraction in his mining operations, and he kept it stored at his home.
And Richard?
Richard Overton had keys to Hubbard's house and was frequently tasked with looking after the place when Hubbard was away on mining trips. So despite Richard's denials, the investigators had definitive proof of his opportunity and access to the lethal substance.
So now the challenge shifted entirely to motive and premeditation. How do you prove intent when a killer has so carefully covered his tracks for years?
This led investigators to seize Richard's personal records. His extensive handwritten diaries, which were blacked out and had the page detailing Janet's death date physically ripped out.
And then there were his computer files, spread across 131 diskettes.
They hoped the handwritten diaries would yield a confession, but the blacked out entries were just frustrating. So they turned to the digital evidence, which looked like nothing more than thoroughly deleted data, just noise on the magnetic surface.
This is where we apply our final decompose and distill approach, mining the digital graveyard.
They brought in a computer expert named William Riddle. And Riddle understood a fundamental principle of magnetic storage that most users, especially back in 1989, completely overlooked.
The act of deleting a file doesn't actually erase the information.
Not at all. When you hit delete, the computer is just performing a high-level function. It marks that space in the file system's index as available for future use. The actual magnetic information, the ones and zeros, the raw data, remains on the disk until a new file is written over it.
It's like erasing a blackboard versus tearing up the paper underneath it. The writing is still faintly there until you write something entirely new on top of it.
That's a great analogy.
But Richard thought he was smarter than that. He surely overwrote some of the files, right?
Oh, certainly. But even when a user overwrites data, often that new data only partially covers the old. The operating system, in its efficiency, might fragment files and only use sections of the available space, leaving behind shards of raw, unformatted data from previous documents.
So the challenge isn't just seeing the ghost data. It's piecing together these microscopic magnetic remnants into a coherent chronological narrative.
And that sounds like an almost insurmountable task.
How did Riddle even begin with 131 diskettes?
His process was meticulous and incredibly time-consuming. First, he cloned every single file to prevent any accidental loss during the forensic analysis. Then, he used specialized recovery software designed to read the raw magnetic signals, not the operating system's file structure, to peel away the layers of existing text.
He was searching for any unformatted digital remnant left over from previously stored documents.
The source material notes this took hundreds of hours. That wasn't just running a program. That was a true act of digital archaeology.
Absolutely. It was a painstaking manual effort to correlate these fragmented digital shards with the handwritten notes. They literally had to reconstruct Richard Overton's secret diary, word by word, chronologically, across dozens of files he thought were permanently wiped clean.
And this was the distilled fact. The recovery of files Richard intended to disappear forever.
And the content of that recovered digital diary, I mean, it must have been devastating. It provided the final missing element, motive and premeditation.
The files revealed the slow, deliberate turning point in Richard's mind. His love-hate relationship with Janet had deteriorated into pure hate, according to his own typing.
And critically, the files contained an entry stating, "Very soon something would happen," written just days before her death on January 24th.
And the documented motives included rage over suspected infidelity and this deep resentment toward her political successes, which he felt she achieved despite not having a formal education.
So the recovered diary entries proved the sophisticated sequence of the crime that investigators had long suspected.
Exactly. Overton used selenium for years to cause Janet long-term unexplained illness, exactly as he did with his first wife. He then stopped the selenium, allowing it to clear her system completely, masking the long-term poisoning.
And then, when the moment was right, he administered a single fatal dose of cyanide, ensuring the selenium would not be present during the post-mortem analysis.
He had planned this crime over years, utilized 2 different poisons, and then meticulously deleted his own documentation. But the silent ghost in the machine testified against him.
The recovered digital evidence was so comprehensive and damning that the jury found him guilty of murder after only 6 hours of deliberation.
He received a sentence of life without parole, confirming that the planning and premeditation stretched back for years.
It's hard to imagine a more effective scientific rebuttal to a killer's calculated lies than recovering the very thoughts he intended to bury forever in the magnetic field of a diskette.
It's the ultimate lesson in modern evidence. We often leave indelible traces of our actions, even when we think we've erased them. These 3 cases, Virginia Russell, Ha-Yun Smith, and Janet Overton, are just powerful demonstrations of that decompose and distill philosophy at the highest level of forensic science.
Right. When investigators couldn't rely on traditional high-visibility evidence, they turned to 3 highly specialized and seemingly peripheral scientific pathways.
We saw how batch chemistry transformed 6 discarded beer bottles, linking Roy Beck to the victim through a single 15-minute production code.
It wasn't just a coincidence. It was a physical impossibility for those 6 codes to be separated and regrouped randomly in that manner. It proved their shared time and location beyond a shadow of a doubt.
Then we saw how forensic entomology used the predictable seasonal life cycle of the Kriebel-Mücken, the black fly, to scientifically prove the car had been submerged in the Muskegon River since November.
That objective biological clock dismantled David Smith's 9-month cover-up timeline, proving he was lying and triggering his conviction.
And finally, we saw how digital forensics took hundreds of hours to excavate the magnetic remnants of 131 diskettes. They reconstructed a secret diary that provided the definitive motive and proof of years-long premeditation against Richard Overton, the cyanide killer.
These cases really underscore the necessity of going beyond the obvious. It is so often the minute detail, the invisible code, the tiny aquatic cocoon, the silent ghost file that holds the most objective, irrefutable truth.
And it takes meticulous science, intellectual rigor, and relentless dedication to turn a piece of industrial trash or a pile of deleted data into evidence capable of securing a life sentence.
So, what does this all mean for you? Think about this. In a world of increasing digital footprints and mass produced goods, every choice we make, from what products we drink to where we discard them to what we type and then delete, leaves a scientific record just waiting to be decoded.
That's right.
If forensic science can reconstruct a murder timeline from a black fly casing or prove premeditation from fragmented data, what minor detail in your own life is actually the most revealing witness?
The world is full of observers, if you know where to look.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We encourage you to continue exploring the hidden witnesses around you.